And these are the bumps and bruises of life. You know, they build character, and you learn from it as you move on. Well, there's a lot more to what goes on in the legal world than people really know. You know, I'm not a politician. I'm not saving the world. I make movies.
He was one of Hollywood's best action stars, but for almost 20 years of cold silence, his career seemed to have stalled. Then, overnight, the headlines broke about a massive, mysterious new development that absolutely nobody saw coming. Snipes just pulled off something so monumental, it completely rewrites his entire tragic career history of self-sabotage. So what really happened? Forged in the streets of New York. Hollywood is an industry that loves a comeback story. But what Wesley Snipes pulled off isn't just a comeback, it's a whole glitch in the Hollywood matrix. For over 2 decades, if his name came up in studio boardrooms, it wasn't usually for a movie pitch. It was a cautionary tale to young actors about how dangerous unchecked hubris was. He was the man who had almost made it to the top, only to watch everything slip from between his fingers. But right now, headlines are actively in a frenzy, because the aging icon stepped out from the shadows of total cultural obscurity and into a modern, multi-billion-dollar spotlight, making history in the process by shattering 2 official Guinness World Records. But how does a man go from being locked in a cold, sterile federal prison cell to being the most talked-about name on the internet? To fully grasp the magnitude of this revival, we have to look past the sword-wielding vampire and look at the psychological scars of a man who spent his entire life operating on edge. Because the truth is, the very survival mechanisms that allowed him to conquer Hollywood are the exact same traits that led to his downfall. Be honest, if you spent decades being told you were bulletproof, wouldn't you start to believe your own myth? Wesley certainly did. But that hyper-confidence wasn't born in a Hollywood trailer or studio. It goes back to the very beginning. Long before the leather coats and the multi-million-dollar contracts, all the way to the unrelenting grit of the South Bronx. Wesley Snipes was born in Orlando, but he was molded in the South Bronx of the 1970s, back when New York's streets were a physical and psychological war zone. And a young Wesley quickly realized that it was survival of the fittest, and you either became tougher or you became a victim. He chose the strength, or rather, the martial arts that would eventually define it. For years, he put his all into elite training, mastering everything from Shotokan karate to capoeira, building a body that was both powerful and aesthetically appealing. Martial arts became his psychological shield, and he carried that same energy into his acting. When Wesley Snipes finally made it to Hollywood in the mid-80s, he first caught the attention of director and filmmaker Martin Scorsese, who cast him as the fierce gang leader Minnie in Michael Jackson's Bad music video. By the time he channeled that cold, calculating ruthlessness into the crack kingpin Nino Brown in New Jack City, Wesley had completely rewritten the rules of the black alpha lead. The movie broke all expectations, turning an $8 million budget into a staggering $47 million pop culture hit. Wesley had successfully conquered the box office, but that hyper-confidence was about to transform, because as the 21st century approached, Wesley wasn't content just being an A-list actor anymore and wanted total creative independence. That desire to do things on his own terms was about to lead him to a failing, bankrupt comic book company where he wouldn't just sign a contract, but single-handedly breathed life into a dying franchise. The movie star who saved Marvel. Let's get one thing straight, because modern pop culture has a terrible memory. Marvel didn't save Wesley Snipes. Wesley Snipes saved Marvel, long before Disney bought the comic empire and way before Robert Downey Jr. began the MCU. The comic book giant was on the decline. It was 1996. Marvel Comics was filing for bankruptcy, and Hollywood treated superhero movies like poison until Wesley Snipes changed that perception with Blade. When Blade premiered in August 1998, it blew up. Carrying a dark, R-rated, blood-drenched narrative on his back, Wesley single-handedly proved that comic book movies could be cinematic blockbusters and make a lot of money, changing the industry forever. The film raked in a massive $131 million worldwide, completely resurrecting a dying empire. Because he demanded absolute creative control and got it, He effectively built the concrete foundation for the multi-billion-dollar cinematic landscape we see today. He was finally on top of the world, a proud black actor who had forced the entire corporate Hollywood system to play by his rules. Or at least, that's what the public saw. But behind the scenes, maintaining that level of dominance was starting to take a psychological toll. You see, when you're the star actor who saved the studio, you expect the studio to keep giving in to your demands. But Hollywood is a fickle monster, and by the early 2000s, the winds were shifting. Shifting tastes, corporate greed, and a creeping sense that his crown was being stolen were about to collide in the most toxic way imaginable. When production started on Blade Trinity in 2004, New Line Cinema was shifting its strategy, leaning toward a lighter tone and introducing younger co-stars like Ryan Reynolds to spawn a spin-off franchise. For Wesley Snipes, who had literally carried Marvel on his back, it felt less like a creative disagreement and more like a calculated corporate mutiny to steal his crown. And Wesley made it clear that he was not happy about it. Rumors began leaking from the production, painting a picture of total chaos on the set. It's reported that Wesley spent days locked inside his trailer, heavily medicated on substance, refusing to talk with the director, David Goyer, except through brief, icy post-it notes signed simply, "From Blade." Things reached a physical breaking point during a heated confrontation involving a black extra wearing a stylish shirt that happened to have the word "garbage" printed on it. Infuriated by what he perceived as racism, Wesley allegedly marched up to Goyer, screamed profanities at him, and physically attempted to strangle him. The director was so deeply shaken that he reportedly went out to a local bar that night and hired a crew of bikers to act as his personal security on set the very next day. It got so absurd that Wesley wouldn't even open his eyes for the camera during a pivotal scene where Blade wakes up on a morgue slab, forcing the studio to spend tens of thousands of dollars in post-production just to use crude, early 2000s CGI to digitally paint fake open eyes over his closed eyelids. In his mind, Wesley was standing his ground against an industry trying to exploit him. But in reality, he was isolating himself, burning the very bridges he had built. He publicly laughed off the strangling rumors later, mocking the idea by saying if he had actually choked Goyer, the director wouldn't be alive to tell the tale. But the damage to his reputation was done. This deep, burning cynicism toward corporate authority didn't stay on the movie set, though, and that exact psychology was about to lead Wesley straight down a path that would cost him a lot, literally. The invisible trap, the fall, and the recovery. At the height of his career, Wesley was pulling in tens of millions of dollars, but the more he made, the more he despised the massive cuts the government was taking in taxes, and in the year 2000, that left him wide open to a highly dangerous, smooth-talking group called American Rights Litigators, led by a radical anti-tax conman named Eddie Ray Khan. They introduced him to the radical sovereign citizen ideology and a pseudo-legal accounting loophole known as the 861 argument, convincing Wesley that domestic income earned by United States citizens wasn't actually legally taxable under the tax code. He bought into it completely, shifting his entire network of film production companies to this bizarre methodology and completely halting payroll tax withholdings for his employees. In April 2001, Wesley took it a step further, filing a highly altered, fraudulent tax document demanding the government return over $7 million he had already paid for the 1997 tax year. In his official, mind-boggling correspondence to the IRS, he formally declared that he was a non-resident alien to the United States and that the federal government had absolutely no legal jurisdiction over him or his millions. He genuinely believed he would game the system and win, but the IRS was quietly assembling a massive, airtight criminal case against him. The worst part is that Wesley Snipes wasn't just a passive victim of a scam. He became its most vocal advocate. He began aggressively hosting anti-tax seminars right inside his home, preaching the sovereign ideology to his peers. And when an employee named Carmen Baker attended one of these meetings and dared to question the legality of the scheme, Wesley immediately threw her out of his home, telling her she wasn't playing along with the game plan. That single act of arrogance would seal his fate. giving federal prosecutors what they needed to prove he was willfully breaking the law. The trap was set, and the untouchable movie star was about to exchange his signature leather trench coat for a numbered prison uniform. When the gavel fell in a federal courtroom in Ocala, Florida, it shattered the entire reality Wesley Snipes had spent a lifetime building. While his legal team managed to get him acquitted on the heavy felony conspiracy and fraud charges, the judge had zero intention of letting the defiant movie star off the hook. Found guilty on 3 misdemeanor counts of willfully failing to file his tax returns, Wesley was hit with the maximum sentence allowed by law, a staggering 3 years in federal prison. On December 9, 2010, Wesley Snipes walked past the heavy iron gates of the minimum security McKean Federal Correctional Institution in Pennsylvania, stripped of his name, his fame, and his autonomy, and was officially reduced simply to inmate number 43355-018. But because Wesley was forged in the grit of the Bronx, he didn't let the walls break him. He pivoted in a way that sounds almost entirely fictional. Instead of brooding in a corner or starting fights, he took his deep martial arts discipline and started teaching yoga and fitness to his fellow inmates. Walking into a federal prison yard, looking over, and seeing the literal daywalker calmly instructing a group of bank robbers on their downward-facing dog must have been quite the sight. But a minimum security facility is still a cage, and 3 years is a long time to watch the world move on without you. By the time he was finally released from house arrest in July 2013, the Hollywood he left behind had completely transformed. He thought his debt to society was paid and that he could simply slide back into the limelight. But the real punishment wasn't the cold concrete of his prison cell. It was only just beginning when he stepped back onto the pavement of Los Angeles, only to find himself trapped on the Hollywood blacklist, initiating an agonizingly slow uphill walk back from obsolescence. When you get out of a federal prison, most people expect the hardest part of the punishment to be in the past. But for a fallen king of Hollywood, the real punishment was discovering that Hollywood had turned its back on him while he was behind bars. When Wesley Snipes returned to Los Angeles in 2013, the era of the wild, unpredictable 90s anti-hero was dead. Hollywood was now directed by risk assessment, board meetings, and insurance bonds. And an actor fresh off a 3-year stint for tax evasion was simply not very desirable. The scripts that used to pile up on his desk simply vanished. Lesser actors, younger stars, and safer brands were now occupying the very superhero throne he had built with his own 2 hands. Yet, true to his South Bronx upbringing, Wesley refused to let that keep him down, and he started the grueling, humbling process of making his way back onto the big screen. His comeback came in 2014, when Sylvester Stallone threw him a lifeline in The Expendables 3. Wesley took to the cynical realism of his situation with great gusto, starting the whole movie with a very publicized meta-joke about his own tax evasion. That was his way of saying to the world that he could take the punch. But just as he was attempting to rebuild his momentum, the system struck him with one final crushing financial blow. In November 2018, the U.S. tax court ruled that the IRS did not abuse its discretion when it rejected his compromise settlement offer and that Wesley still owed $9.5 million in back taxes. Most people would break under that kind of stress, but Wesley Snipes didn't. He carried his financial and creative burdens quietly because he knew that the industry that had cast him out was in need of the kind of raw energy he could provide. He just needed the perfect opportunity. And in 2024, he got it. The multiverse, Hail Mary. Looking at the modern entertainment industry, it's become painfully obvious that Hollywood is running out of ideas. By the 2020s, the multi-billion-dollar Marvel machine that Wesley Snipes helped build was starting to suffer from severe corporate fatigue as audiences grew tired of sanitized green-screen blockbusters and safe, formulaic heroes. The studio desperately needed something different for the fans, something dangerous and completely unexpected. And that is when what seemed like the universe's biggest irony would play out. Ryan Reynolds, the very co-star Wesley had fiercely clashed with when working on Blade, Trinity 20 years prior, picked up the phone. For 2 decades, the legendary feud between Reynolds and Snipes was widely considered an unfixable Hollywood legend. But Reynolds, now operating as a powerful creative mastermind behind the Deadpool franchise, understood a fundamental truth about cinema and the fans that the bigwigs and execs didn't understand. He reached out to Wesley, extending an olive branch for Deadpool and Wolverine. And Wesley, now humbled, chose to answer the call. When he stepped onto the movie set in his iconic leather armor, it was a high-stakes, multi-million-dollar gamble. The production kept his involvement a secret, hiding him from paparazzi, leaks, and industry insiders. Then on July 26, 2024, as lights dimmed in theaters across the globe, when the camera slowly panned up to reveal Wesley Snipes, standing tall in the shades, the fans lost it. He looked directly at the camera and delivered a line that instantly weaponized 20 years of industry gossip. There's only been one Blade. There's only ever gonna be one Blade. In a single brief multiverse sequence, Wesley completely stole the show, reminding a whole new generation exactly who built the house they were all sitting in. But this wasn't just a fleeting trend that faded by the next morning. Because as the opening weekend box office numbers began to roll in, this shocking multiverse appearance made history that no one in Hollywood could ever erase. Wesley Snipes didn't just survive the fallout of his past, he walked away with 2 official Guinness World Records pinned to his name, executing a historic takeover of the very franchise that had tried to leave him in the dark. By stepping back into the leather duster exactly 25 years and 340 days after he first introduced the character in 1998, Wesley officially broke the record for the longest career as a live-action Marvel character, narrowly dethroning his own co-star, Hugh Jackman, whose legendary run as Wolverine stood at 24 years, and completely bypassing Patrick Stewart. But that wasn't the only record he broke. His return also won him a second world record, the longest gap between Marvel character appearances. 19 years and 231 days had passed since he last played the character in the disastrous aftermath of Blade, Trinity easily dunking on the previous 17-year record held by Alfred Molina's Dr. Octopus. When the news broke, Wesley broke his silence on social media with a deadpan, brilliant piece of peer-to-peer humor, asking, "What? Really? Do I get a certificate too?" For years, the corporate machine tried to break Wesley, all while pretending he didn't exist. But, in the end, it needed him to save it. By simply showing up and outlasting everyone who tried to replace him, the man they tried to completely delete became permanently etched into cinematic history. But a record-breaking weekend and a couple of shiny certificates don't just erase a lifetime of scars, and they certainly don't change the complex psychology of a man who fought his way out of the South Bronx. At the end of the day, Wesley Snipes is not your typical Hollywood hero. He's a deeply complex, fiercely resilient anti-hero who lived entirely by his own rules and paid the absolute maximum price for them. The very same defiance that helped him to survive the violent streets of the South Bronx and conquer a ruthless entertainment industry is the exact same hubris that blinded him when he decided to go to war with the federal government. But his record-breaking career revival proves something profound about the chaotic nature of modern fame. Hollywood can lock you away, strip your wealth, delete your number, and try to pass your crown to someone else. But they can never, ever steal your legacy. When the dust settled, the multi-billion-dollar superhero industry had to admit a bruising truth. They couldn't replicate the energy of the man who started it all. Now that he's written his name permanently into the history books, the ball is entirely in Hollywood's court. The fans have spoken, and they want more of him. So, let's hear from you. Now that Wesley Snipes has pulled off the most monumental comeback in cinematic history, do you want to see Marvel give him one final full-length solo Blade movie to officially close out his narrative, or should he leave the leather jacket behind? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to check out the next deep dive on your screen right now. Thanks for watching.